Piyush, thank you for accepting the invitation and joining me at Imkan Podcast. As you know, Imkan Podcast is an initiative to spread the knowledge about the future thinking in the region and to introduce well-known futurists like yourself to our audience. And without any further ado, I will leave the audience the privilege to search you up on the Google, on Wikipedia, on your own website to know more about your bio. But let me start with this. What gets you into future thinking?
Thanks, Udafas. Thanks a lot. I know this conversation has been a long time pending, and I'm so glad we are able to do it now. It's almost the close of the year, and I hope exciting things await for you. And we get to do some exciting stuff together also. So to start out, what got me into futures was some of the literature that I read back in early 2000. Like people writing about there were reports, there were research reports. Very little used to be said in terms of what the technique or the methodologies were. So it got me thinking, like, how do people actually determine what trends are, what drivers of change are, like what makes them sort of start to put together a document which would canvas over 100-year strategy, or at least trying to look at where a country or a nation would be going in 100 years. So it wouldn't have been, I mean, I had at a very early stage, I did recognize that this just couldn't just be literature review. I mean, you just don't do qualitative analysis and come up with what the next 100 years or 50 years or 25 years would look like. There has to be some method to this madness. So basically, it wasn't until I think back in 2013. So it was a 13-year gap. I mean, I'm still reading books, I'm still reading the research work, I'm not getting close to how it's actually done. It was basically 2013. I was initially, during my master's program at the Graduate Institute, I was exposed to horizon scanning. So that window, I mean, this is the sort of stuff that a UK cabinet does within their own department, their own unit, in terms of looking at what is happening in the environment. And so we tend to sort of say, like, this sort of environmental scanning, for instance. I mean, that is a way of actually canvassing what sort of emerging signals or weak or strong signals are there out there. So that being said, I mean, that wasn't the only part. Later, very early on, then got introduced to the Millennium Project. That exposed me to a lot of the methodologies that they put together. I mean, there are more than 35 different methodologies that they have able to compile in one place. So not that the master's degree went for a waste, but the fact that here is this organization, here is this think tank that has made the effort of bringing everything together for a student like myself, a researcher like myself, to have a very sharp view as to how foresight work, how futures research work actually really happens. And so this also gave me the opportunity to interact with people who are coming up with new methods and techniques. And so that in that spirit, I've been very lucky and blessed that in the last 10 years or so, I've been really exposed to some good work and some very good people like yourself. I mean, hadn't it not been for a foresight activity with the Asia Pacific, we would have never been introduced. So it's efforts like these that help people to come together and really understand what are the new stuff that is happening in the foresight sector.
Brilliant, brilliant. And since you mentioned when we met, I think last year in Bangkok at the Asia Pacific Futures Network conference, it was when we met during that conference. But if you remember, at that time, nobody spoke about a pandemic. Nobody knew that
Yeah.
anything like that. Everybody was like planning for the next conference in 2020. I think it was in Malaysia or something like that. But all the plans like went down. Um,
Everything became online.
how it was for you, the pandemic thing, from the starting of the pandemic, how it changed your perspective about how we are doing work, how you are doing work, new potential,
Right.
maybe tell me about it.
So I think one of the areas that went complete neglected in the last 15 years of my life was my health. So this pandemic actually, that's more on a personal side. So this pandemic actually gave me the opportunity and the space to reflect on, how I've been missing out on some of the health choices that I should have been making as a way of life. So that has been a dramatic change. There's been a dramatic change in lifestyle altogether. But that's on a personal side. The work, in terms of work, it has been slow. A lot of organizations are not taking the risk. We understand, but when I remember when I did an updated version of Pakistan State of Future Index, we did factor in a pandemic like situation as one of the possible development or an event that could impact on the conditions of the country. So, I mean, to say that there was, and this thinking was happening back in January and February of 2019. So when you had this thinking happening back then, I mean, it didn't, so this pandemic, maybe the response and the reaction of different governments and organizations may have been a slightly misguided in the beginning, but it's the way how governments also started to shape up their response also in months. Pakistan has been very, in terms of just talking about Pakistan, I mean, there are highs and lows, but in terms of how they're actually managing the whole situation, it's been very well. The small businesses are actually bearing much of the brunt than as compared to large scale manufacturers and all those other organizations. So what you do eventually, what we did learn, digital is the way to go on about it.
Right.
Work from home is also an option. So you cut down on so many costs. So we just realized how efficient we can become using these technologies. Like for instance, so interaction should happen just as a way of social interaction. So the interactions have changed tremendously. We spend more time on Zoom, we spend less time outside. When I'm talking about health, I see, at least around myself, I see a lot more people getting into exercises, eating healthier foods. So these are some of the changes that has happened, at least in the urban landscape. As far as how gravely it has affected people who are daily wages in terms of the labor, I mean, it has affected them immensely. At least in the construction industries, and you have such sort industry where you have people working day to day. So with that in context, and also what we, at the close of year, what we do also see that there is immense joblessness. The opportunities are shrinking. People are being less employable. During no organization would want to take the risk of actually employing people. Also, so there have been layoffs. There have been cutbacks. A lot of those things have happened in just the last 7 to 6 months. So we see that not only the governments, even the organizations are not prepared as to how to manage in such situations. So it goes to show the viability of such organization in terms of their own strategic planning. So you see a complete void, which actually brings me to a point that it gives people like us more opportunity to work with such organizations.
Right. Actually, that's true. I witnessed, like from my side, a lot of let me say a demand on like a future related thinking, especially with more people, more organization now are concerned about, maybe the next pandemic, the next disruptors, and they want to think and be prepared for that. But let me come back when you mentioned you are paying more attention to your health. It's like across my mind that, the first 2 months of the pandemic, everyone were sharing the news about, animals going to the street, a new kind of, the healthy atmosphere, like earth itself is now taking care of like recovering, from our like collective pollution and CO2s and all of that. I think this is like a funny analogy because now we can take or have more focus on our own health, earth, as well as it's like an analogy or like a perspective. What is really we need to focus on? I found it very, very interesting. And you mentioned, Baryusha, about the Pakistan's State of the Future Index. Can
Yeah.
you talk us more about, the beginning of this great initiative? Who were involved in that? Where are you now at this initiative?
So I started back in 2013. Around the same time I got exposed to what horizon scanning is. I wanted to do a bit earlier, but I had very little knowledge and as a subsequent, very little skills in order to pursue something of that sort. So it started taking shape in terms of I got a technology partner involved in 2016 to develop the real-time Delphi tool. So I actually initiated in terms of developing the entire tool where we can connect different universities. So for the first 2 years, it was basically trying to get at least the geographical footprint in place. So we got almost 25 different universities, 6 think tanks involved in this whole initiative. So you have to bear in mind that this is very new to Pakistan. I mean, this is so new that nobody really can understand or grasp the full essence of it. So it becomes a very good advocacy tool also. How can you communicate with different universities spread across different geographic areas? What foresight is, what futures research helps you do, and
Ruth,
how it is
I can
cross.
stop you here. Just
Yes.
if you can, like where you got the idea, why you thought that this is important for Pakistan. Like you could
Right.
have done like million other initiative, like more profitable. Why you thought at that time or that back then that this is important for Pakistan? This is important for
So,
the future
so
of Pakistan.
yeah, so a lot of my, that's a very good question in the sense that not many people get to ask, like, why would I have done it? Like, okay, so you know how different countries get bracketed as a third world or advanced countries, or economies of different scale and everything. So I used to wonder, like, why does it make us third world? Why does it make us emerging? Why does it make them like advanced? I mean, what is the thought that, so the basic premise of why I started all of this, I used to do a lot of I still do a lot of research work, not just on Pakistan but different sector specific globally also. What it made me understand and realize that the decision making process is very weak, and the inputs of the decision making are very much they I wouldn't say they're not really self generated, if you know what I mean. So if the inputs are not self generated and the process is weak, so you have really then you are bound to be called a third world country or the emerging economy or whatever. So when you see two elements, and this is just as part of my own research work, when in any country or any society, when you see two elements which are weak in nature and which are not self-motivated, which are not driven inherently in your own context, then the output or the outcome is fairly obnoxious at the same time. So I took a stock of the last 70 years of the country and tried to canvas all the decisions that, I mean, some were relatively really good decisions, some were not so much, because the society never reaped the benefit of it to the fullest. So if you even take out 30-year chunk, if you did the historic analysis in the past 30-year chunks, you would also see, well, I mean, why are we still poor? Why are we still, our yardstick to measure poverty is anyone less than who's living under less than $1.9. And why do those things? How is it that despite being called Islamic Republic of Pakistan, we don't have the kind of social justice system in place that can actually equalize and bring much more equality into the system? So State of the Future Index was one of the answers. It's not the only answer. So I work closely sometimes with Suhail, I work closely with Jerome, and closely with other people who are within this foresight sector. But that is just to help understand the inputs to the decisions need to be self-generated in the local context. it cannot be artificially borrowed from other people and then made it part of the decision making process. It doesn't last, and we've seen examples of it not happening. So a lot of the development programs that even do happen in Pakistan come in for 2-3 years, does not leave the impact that it needs. So the flow of money that comes in goes back out. You don't see them generating enough revenue or enough of the GDP from within the system. That being said, so what we realize that there is a certain lapse in the process, and the inputs really need to be understood. And so the inputs need to be measured also at the same time to understand change. So we've seen there is a capacity issue within the entire legislature. There is a capacity issue with also the state institutions. So it's a very tough. I mean, if I'm able to do it, I swear, if I'm able to do it in Pakistan, for me, like it's like, okay, it's not rocket science. I know how it's done. How many people are interested? Get them on board and get things mobilizing. So basically, those elements help me recognize the issues and the factors that make us enable us to take certain decisions, which may not be good even in the short term, let alone long term for the country.
What was the main or the biggest challenge doing so? Is it the mindset? Is it the system?
So I'll tell you. I mean, you work with people that you know, right?
Yeah.
And the assumption is the people should know you.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
And so with that assumption and with that thought in mind, when you're in an environment where people immediately don't recognize something, they become afraid. So the fear factor kicks in.
Okay.
What could this potentially mean? So what could it potentially mean then leads you to some inane questions that you spend much of your energy in responding to them, because they're your partners. You can't really isolate. So the challenges were, I've been lucky in terms of, like, we have the entire political spectrum from different political organizations and parties on board. They had been extremely supportive. But still, at the end of the day, even though I did think that it's too early for the government to even adopt something like that, there is this constant nagging, like, why are you doing this if the government is not doing? And I was like, I mean, as a citizen of this country, I have certain responsibilities which I feel comfortable in sort of executing. So why not should I be doing it? Why should I wait for the government or any state institution to capture this whole thing? And once they do, they should have the platform, but they should also have the network in place in terms of execution. So their life, eventually, when they do take up that decision, their life and the manner in which they execute foresight research becomes relatively easier than it was for me. So that would be like my gift back to the country.
Yeah. Excellent. So if we fast forward to 2030.
2030 is just around the corner.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully we should have an Asia State of Future Index in place, for instance.
Yeah. So if we can a project 2030, 2040, whatever in the future, what is your preferred version of the future? How you see things plays out in in your utopia?
Okay, so this is like completely utopian thinking, where there is not room for any criticism, right?
Sure.
I mean, my idea of a very 2030, a good future would be like there is no restriction of movement. So there is
speaking
freedom
about Pakistan here or the whole world?
I'm just speaking about, like, generally. I mean, people should stop creating barriers for people who want to explore the world. I mean, if you didn't have people you didn't have people who are curious, who want to see things that they've never seen, you wouldn't have so much beauty in this world. Right. So you want more people to interact. You want more people to travel. You want to make traveling less expensive. Thank God for Airbnb and other subsidized travel experiences that young people are getting to do this. So their priorities and their vision of life is very different from a generation 2 or 3 back. And then the saddest part is that generation still hogs on to main decision making powers.
Mm.
So we see that transition. So there has to be two things I feel very strongly about is freedom of movement and freedom of expression. I think those are the two great human values that we should not really discourage people from exploring into. So those are the two. So I want to see two of those things actually flourishing more.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, the cyberspace actually to provide those, even if you like virtually, you can, take tours now and some sightseeing, but and you can interact with people in different places, like what we are doing now. And even for like freedom of expression, it's like somehow in the cyberspace it's guaranteed, but there is a trend that we are witnessing. We call it, the network defragmentation, or the fragmentation of the network, where now
Mhm.
some countries, without mentioning any, they are closing their internet. There's you cannot access website or applications from out of that state, and this is like a trend, and it's somehow is growing. And
But then if you I have this thing when you tried, and this is something that I've mostly abhorred to banning stuff, banning things because they're not going your way.
Mhm.
It's a sign of weakness. It's not something that one should be proud of. and
Right.
and so and so I mean, just because you miss the boat, you don't want other passengers to get on the next one. I mean, that's
Yeah.
your problem. You were weak in terms of recognizing the first boat, but nevertheless, I mean, you're right in terms of fragmentation, because the way trade is going to happen is fundamentally changing also.
Yeah.
Behaviors are shifting, and the more you're going to close down, the more, it's like a spring effect. The more you try to push it down, the more it's going to spring back up.
Yeah.
So I mean, for how long? And you're working with a generation that really isn't really confined to such ideologues.
Yeah.
They're very different. I mean, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have imagined talking to one another like this.
Exactly.
And that's just 15 years ago.
Yeah.
15 years from now, it's a completely different, with the kind of technologies you're talking about, be it virtual or augmented realities, we're going to create a very
I
different experience altogether.
totally agree. I totally agree. I think the change will be like not like a linear. It will be like exponential, especially with, like as you mentioned, the new Generation Z. They are more like open. They want to explore the world. They want the freedom. They want, the freedom of expressions, of movement, whatever you are mentioning here. This is like intrinsic. They want this as like a basic human rights. They are not like a privilege or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
From there, I want to jump to another topic. I think it's related with Agahi, your another initiative. It's like you are focusing on journalism in Pakistan, but
Yes.
how is that work related to the future, the State of the Future Index, and how you are employing, or like using future thinking and that? How it's like,
Okay.
why you are focusing on journalism in the first place?
So I have a journalism background in terms of my experience. So I had been in different editorial position with the broadcast sector,
Mm.
and we recognized a roadblock within the sector or the industry as a whole, that it's not really growing, it's not really adapting to different technologies in a way that they should be adapting. We've almost seen the print dying, and the only reason some people actually do pick up print newspaper is because they're so used to, there is some level of affinity involved. But a lot of us, we're just reading stuff of our cell phones, of our computer. We're not really much buzzed about like picking up the newspaper anymore. So it's a very different sort of and what we realized, that there were thousands of journalists being sort of employed with different organizations, were not given enough training to adapt to these technological changes.
Uh-huh.
So the whole training program also plugs in that how do journalists, number one, make sure their content is ethical, Number two, it's relevant and it's globally also relevant. So something which has happened in Pakistan could easily be understood by someone who's probably sitting in Rwanda or South Africa. So when you contextualize content in such a manner, you see some similarities in different countries also, be it because of the social norm or be it because of the cultural affinities and all of those factors. So technology and journalism in that context played a very fundamental role in terms of designing our media development initiative. So that's a sort of initiative that is still going on. We have more, and that plugs in with an annual journalism awards. So we've been doing these awards for the past 8 years, and we have journalists and jury from all over. Journalists from Pakistan and jury from all over the world who get to evaluate the content. Now, when you say what is the link between the foresight and this, even the content that is being evaluated is based on certain best practices and benchmark. So they get scored accordingly. So we can also map the trend in terms of what kind of journalistic content is being rewarded the most over the last 8 years. So now we are seeing more digital platforms which represent certain journalistic content are becoming winners in different categories. And we see the traditional, the broadcast and the print sort of shrinking. So when we see these, but this has only happened because we created a complete ecosystem around that industry as a whole, where we're recognizing the journalists, we're recognizing the anchors, we're recognizing also what is the most credible news content at the same time, who's the most credible anchor, who's following the ethical guidelines. When you have all of that mix, you're able to distinguish with such insight and intelligence, you're able to distinguish what are the emerging trends and what would be the drivers of change. So internet becomes that drivers of change for your media industry as a whole. A lot of things are shifting to the digital platform, and people who adapt more quickly will benefit more.
And I think having this or building this ecosystem of around journalism, the profession itself, the inputs and what outcomes of this ecosystem, it somehow contributes to the future of Pakistan, right? Like
Yeah.
when you're having like this healthy ecosystem, for sure it will push the country forward in different areas in policy making and decision making, even and transparency and investment coming from outside, the trust in the transparency in the country. I think this is like it is contributing to the future state of Pakistan.
So we also, like, within those awards, you have like almost 35 to 40 different categories. So from sustainable development goals, we also have categories in governance, police reforms, rule of law, climate change, environment, and gender parity. So you have all of these categories where journalists are actually encouraged to submit and nominate their own work.
Nice.
So you also see what is the capacity level for journalists to even recognize which of their article or news video actually falls in which category. So that's another good assessment tool in terms of understanding the state of media in Pakistan.
Nice. And I think, Puruesh, if you agree with me that the starting point that any futurist or someone who's interested in shaping the future should be really in considering the mindset, the whoever, like the stakeholders and the initiative or the project undergoing, is the mindset, how they are viewing the world, how they are like doing stuff, and try to develop something that is workable or something that they will understand and they are willing to engage in that. Um, Last two questions. I know that we are somehow past our time, and thanks for that. What is your your advice for someone who's getting into like future thinking, especially someone maybe from different background, from IT, from history, from whatever? What is your advice? How they can use future thinking in their own area?
I started from a degree in business and a background in the corporate sector. So one has to be interested and curious enough to understand how this whole thing works, and then be open to a lot of criticism that is going to come your way. At the same time, be open to how different people are doing it around the world. So not be limited to a particular way of looking at the world, but so openness comes in a lot handy when you're doing foresight work. So I would encourage people who are trying to get into foresight and futures thinking is to be as open as possible, because the minute you actually put limitations in your own thinking, then you shut down the canvas of actually having a very broader view of the future, and have a very myopic view as to, like you said, things become linear. Then you don't factor in many of the surprises that could possibly occur. You don't anticipate changes that have not occurred to occur. So those are the sort of changes and sort of things that you, as a foresight practitioner, one would need. And then there are so many different organizations, at least pick up one way of doing it, so then you can grow from there.
Excellent. So be curious, openness, and engage with different
Absolutely.
initiatives out there. Maybe that will lead me to my last question. I know that, mashallah, you have a lot of initiatives, a lot of projects, engagement that you are involved in. What's next? What is the big project that you are doing or planning to do?
Well, I mean, I've been working on how to look at Asia in a manner that, a lot of these constructs, the foresight constructs, are very Western oriented. And then when you try to use a Western framework in terms of understanding, this area is thousands of years old. I mean, there are people who understand the history, and they're not so narrow as like just 100, 200, or 300 years. So they're a very different mindset. So in terms of when you see, like, I've been to a lot of conferences where you say, like, people say the West is this and Asia is rising, and I'm like wondering, like, okay, Asia is rising. I mean, if China is carrying if China is the flag bearer, or if India is the flag bearer, or any other country which could be a flag bearer in the process, we need to understand that Asia is more connected in terms of its geographical boundaries. And how do you, long story short, like, how do you look at Asia? So from even a Western perspective, how would one want to look at Asia? Would it be through a civilization foresight, or would it actually be through a very nation-centric foresight? Both models are available. So well, hopefully, my work should be focused on what kind of a lens would one need for the European markets, for the North American markets, for the Latin American markets, in terms of its insight into Asia. And so you get the trade going, you get the freedom of movement going, you try and understand different forms of expression all over the world and the limitation, therefore. And so you are building more bridges rather than burning more ships.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds interesting, and I couldn't wait to see the fruits out of this. I think it's needed in the overall, global dialogue. This I am aware about, the World Economic Forum. They have an initiative called the Great Reset, where they are now trying to promote beyond GDP prosperity index or metrics. When you mentioned that, like, third world or developed or developing countries, it's all based on the GDP at the end of the.
So the recent report, they have let go of that. They've
Yeah.
let go of the stages. I
Yeah.
mean, so that is an encouraging sign. So everyone gets an equal start, maybe not the equal opportunity, but an equal playing field.
And in addition, you need to have, different aspects when you're looking at, how developed. At the end of the day, what is the outmost goal is, the well-being and the happiness of
Yeah.
your citizens. And that's not like, okay, it's related to the GDP, but there's other factors that could play a role there. So I think this is important. I think also important that this open dialogue between different countries, different cultures is also important. And yeah, I wish you good luck with your initiatives, with your projects, and as I told you, I couldn't wait to see it coming out. Thank you again, Ryush. It was pleasant, and
Likewise.
hopefully we'll catch up on
Thank you,
further
Muzaffar.
activities.
Thank you. Hopefully we see each other soon.
Thanks a lot.